here we are on Thursday, March 12th at 6:30 at night. And I'm here with Rachel Feinstein to my right, Tamara Jenkins, and Lisa Yuskavage. We were supposed to be having a panel discussion at the Jewish Museum tonight in our auditorium. Sofia Coppola and Florence Welch were also supposed to join us. But New York City is currently in a state of emergency. All museums have shut down, including ours. So we thought we would move this party to an intimate and much smaller off-site location and continue the conversation and share it all with you in a different way. So we're gonna just kind of get going. Maybe first I'll just explain who everybody is in case that's not clear, but Rachel Feinstein, her exhibition Made in Mother Crone was on view at the Jewish Museum from October 30th until today.
Oh, I didn't know that.
We only lost 1 week of the exhibition, so that's amazing. It was a survey of 25 years of her work in sculpture, painting, video. It was an incredible experience. If everyone saw it, that's great. And there's a catalog as well. And in that catalog are some of the people with me tonight. Tamara and Lisa both had conversations with Rachel. Lisa, you were in the conversation about witches.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure why.
And Tamara, yours was mother.
But Kelly, you didn't say who you are.
Oh, I'm Kelly Taxter. I'm the curator. I'm the Barnett and Annalee Newman Curator of Contemporary Art at the Jewish Museum, and I organized Rachel's exhibition. And so I'm really happy to have these ladies here to talk about some other stuff. Storytelling in particular. Tamara is a filmmaker. Most recently, her film Private Life, available on Netflix, an amazing film about, in some way, about motherhood. And Lisa Yuskavage, painter. Her exhibition Wilderness is open now at the Aspen Art Museum, where things are still happening, I think.
Aspen's not in shutdown yet. Yeah.
Another big survey of your work.
But the one before was called Baby Brood, so it's sort of about motherhood, but about the motherhood of artwork.
Yes,
that's right.
Absolutely, which is the big conversation.
And everyone here knows each other really well, so it's a perfect group to have a conversation. And we're going to address the idea of storytelling and narrative and how that might manifest in all of your work. The idea of autobiography, if this is something particular to women or not, and if it is, how does that reveal itself in different ways? And in preparation for this, we shared a series of questions, really kind of things to think about, topics to think about. And then in doing my research, I started to find connections and overlaps, basically in different things that everyone had said in various interviews over the last year or two. So things about your most recent bodies of work or most recent projects. So I kind of wanted to start with two questions and see where that leads us. So the first one is, I noticed basically everyone said in some way that the work that you do makes stories visible that have not yet been told, or tells stories that haven't yet been told. I'll just pull a quote, Tamara. You said, when speaking about Private Life, that people always want to see something they've already seen. One of the good things about being a female filmmaker is that you get to put things on screen that haven't been seen. And I think that was...
Say that? That
you
sounds
did.
So good.
Yeah. I think if I remember, it was from Script magazine. Does that sound right?
I was interviewed by them,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess because certainly in filmmaking, you're an underrepresented, gender.
As opposed to painting.
Yeah, I know. You guys have it. Isn't it all amazing?
As opposed to sculpting.
Yeah, there's so much of you. Yeah. Well, in the filmmaking world, which I know more, there's gender problems. There's not as many women filmmakers. There's not as many other people besides white men filmmakers, male filmmakers. So it does give you a reservoir of material because it's a perspective that isn't as expressed.
I think and Lisa, you said this somewhere too about your work. I think maybe it was in one of the interviews around Wilderness, which was you thought of your work as stories that haven't been told yet. And I have that quote somewhere in here, and I can be more
I don't
specific.
think I use the word stories, but I might say, yeah. I mean, I sort of don't think of myself as, because I read your questions, and a lot of it is about male versus female and things like that. And I realized that I'm really an androgynous art maker. I'm not very androgynous personally. I kind of wish I was, but it's I don't go to my studio and I don't think about being particularly a woman. I really do think about being Lisa, and that I, as Lisa, I don't really even really relate to other women's stories. Like, I don't have a story about being a mother or trying to be a mother. I have painted pregnant women because it was, a metaphor in a certain way for me, and it was also something that was happening around me, and also it hadn't been done. So it was also observing things and kind of being sensitive to things, and also being aware. Like when I painted the what I call penthouse paintings around 1997. I must have made maybe about 6 or 7 of them, and that became what I became. Like, aren't you the chick that does the penthouse paintings? Because it became so. I didn't realize I was taking something on that hadn't been taken on almost by anybody. I'm not even sure if Made in Heaven had been done when I was doing this. Maybe I got to get the date straight.
I don't remember the
but
date for that.
You don't remember the date. Yeah, I almost feel like it was just a little. I'm not saying he looked at my work. Yeah. I'm just saying that, meaning Jeff Koons. But the idea of a woman looking at porn and painting from porn, even if it's softcore, was such a moment. But I felt like in some way, as Lisa, which is not necessarily to be gendered, but is like, it was an experience that I had, and Tamara actually wrote about this when this is part of our little cycle of connections. Yeah. Tamara and I met at a coffee shop before we were anybody, in the sense of you couldn't say like, oh, that's Tamara Jenkins, the filmmaker. Mm. I was working on a show. She was working on her first feature film. Mm. And, we just were like, what are you doing? And so, but later I asked her to write for me because I thought it'd be interesting to have someone who was not an art writer, right? And she really got into the penthouse and the sort of slippery slope of all of that. give me another one of those. But we were talking about just the commonality amongst young women of actually sneaking around and looking at that kind of stuff and being fascinated by that kind of stuff. And that unearths a story that hasn't been told, which is that young girls do look at pornography because it's around, and it may be your first sexual experience, because it just, it's not like they have special stuff just for you. Yeah, like, this would be appropriate for you to look at to get you eroticized as a 8-year-old or a 10-year-old. Yeah. And so you just take what's around, and in this case she had the same experience, so she wrote about it. And did you have that experience?
It was just to be clear, I mean, it's so different because
now they can look at anything they want.
But when we were little, there were magazines hid under beds.
Those were the good old days.
When you would sort of find it was a physical object, and you would hide it.
It seems so highbrow.
It was already hidden.
It seems so highbrow.
Yeah, but also before that, it was like boys and probably girls looking at like National Geographic magazine.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah.
Because that was the first time they saw like another naked person, and it was just sexuality.
But I don't know if you had any experience
and the
like
joy
that.
Of sex and the 70s kind of.
Oh my gosh.
And the covers of trashy book or whatever, Fear of Flying. I have a very strong memory of being on the bookshelf, and it was like a garment bag unzipped like this, and then like boobs, and it was just my dad read it, and I was like, "What is happening here?" It was so weird, and it also sort of looked like a body bag, even though I didn't quite put that all together.
That's incredible.
Creepy.
But I do think, like, it occurred to me. See, I was teaching and I stopped teaching in the 90s, but I was there in the universities when it was kind of like a lot of my colleagues at the time were really pushing students especially like at NYU, there were a lot of Asian students, a lot of Korean students, a lot of Chinese students. And they were like, you should be working with your stories. And, they would often, like during critiques, fight about this, like amongst themselves and say like, just because you're Chinese doesn't mean you own rice paper. Like it was just because you're using rice paper. I remember these arguments about identity politics.
Yeah.
And I actually don't think identity politics are particularly, I think that the form that your work takes is really vital. I think that the stories are fine, but the form has to be really original as well. And so like one of the things about our stories that are original, which nobody can really, okay, my sister might read an interview I gave and say, that didn't happen. And, so we can argue. And I say, well, that didn't happen to you, but it did happen to me. Because recently I said something about Hardscrabble neighborhood in Juniata Park. Actually, that was not what I said. It was what the writer said in the intro. Hardscrabble Juniata Park neighborhood. And my sister made a comment about Hardscrabble Juniata Park. And I said, well, you were shy and stayed at home all the time. I was out there. It was Hardscrabble. I'm sorry. It was described the way I experienced it. And it was not your experience. So, but taking all of that narrative, it means nothing. Just like with my Asian students in the at NYU, it's like rice paper. My tough stories, my Penthouse magazines. What matters is what do you do with that as art making? What really matters here is Rachel's stories, which she used in her work, are fine, interesting, only and important because of the way she created them as artworks. And that's what transforms what we do. And that is that was true and still is true for white males. Their stories, are only as interesting as what the form is.
Well, you also think of the truth with like James Fry with A Million Little Pieces, when he wrote this book and it became very popular, and then he got in trouble for it supposedly not being truth. And artists can have fiction to their truth. And this idea that you're not allowed to, and that also you're...
I thought that was ridiculous, that getting him in trouble for that.
I was like, interesting. I think about that because when your work is defined as autobiographical, which is something you were on your, at least in a filmmaking sense, I often feel like it's almost like
people think that's
dismissive. It's as if like, well, it happened, so she wrote it. You're like, what are you talking about?
That's something that very much happens because it's sort of the history of women's literature, the history
I
of
know,
women's,
it's dismissive.
All autobiographical.
That's so interesting.
It comes from like the process of diary, there's
it's almost like, oh, it's domestic or it's autobiographical. It's like ways of kind of.
When I was a very young artist, I walked into
David Lynch is autobiographical too, because it's the world isn't naturalistic. It isn't. So anyway, I have a lot of thoughts about that thing, and that in memoir, it's supposed to be true. In film, if you make something, if I made one of my movies that's supposed to be autobiographical and I put it in a memoir, I'd be like arrested, like him.
Well, now
I'd get in big trouble because I made it up.
That James Fry thing, it just occurred to me. It's totally off. Not expecting to talk about this, but it's like. The whole cancel culture that has just come up. I just realized that it probably started back then.
Actually,
whatever year that was, it's like where just because an artist makes a little like bloop, whatever. I think he just actually was playing with form. And so what? It wasn't whatever, but whatever. I'm just.
Well, no, I think this is one of the main one of the things I wanted to get to at some point in this conversation, and maybe we'll skip around and we can. But I was reading a quote. The artist Hito Steyerl.
No.
Video artist. It's irrelevant, really, if you know who she is or not. But she studied with a filmmaker, Haroon Farooqi, and he plays with the documentary form. And she was talking about the kind of problematic of right now we're living in a civic time where facts are so assaulted, and as like a culture that we feel like we need facts so badly to understand what's happening politically, what's happening socially, and she said the mix of fact and fiction is one of the main tools of contemporary political manipulation. Misinformation and conspiracy theory are just two examples. So there is a new lease on realism to safeguard veracity, facts, reality, etc. But there is another question which is usually overlooked. How about poetry, literature? Is Shakespeare fake news? Is Ursula Le Guin conspiracy theory? It seems that one not only needs to defend facts, but maybe fiction has to be defended equally vigorously. It is a fact that telling fictional stories does not necessarily equal lying. So while the assault on facticity erodes civic life, trying to mitigate the situation by minimizing fiction erodes art.
I mean, I think that's also the big problem now, is that you're not allowed to be a fantasist at all outside of your own experience. So it's a huge problem for me that I like to imagine what it would be like if I was in a different time period, which is acceptable, but I'm not allowed to have the experience in a different color, skin, or a different sex, or a different experience. And that's now shut down.
But part of the fun of being an artist is not being given permission, but taking it.
But now your head will be cut off, and
it depends. It depends on how you do it and what you do with it. I mean,
I don't know. I think that all fantasy has kind of been put in peril in this way by even thinking about it. That the idea that
there's anxiety.
There's a lot of anxiety,
and
I have like an
culture.
idea, and I'll instantly question whether I can go forward with that idea because I'm going to be taken down by a witch hunt. Is a terrible thing as an artist, I believe. I think
one of the things I was going to say in the last thing you were talking about is like, I remember being pretty young. It was like 1990 something, early 90s, and showing up for a lecture I was giving, and no one knew what I looked like. And I sat in the back, and there were these women and talking to each other, and they said, she was molested, she was like devastatingly molested. This is what this work is about. Yeah.
Oh my God.
That's what this work is about.
And the audience was talking?
Yeah, they were there early. I was there early.
Incognito.
Wow.
I was incognito, not on purpose.
Wow.
I just was generally not known. Nobody knew who I was. And, I sat behind them, and I wanted to go like, if I had been the object of my work as whatever, those particular paintings called Bad Baby paintings, that I made in the early 90s and showed in January 93, which is essentially still 1992. If I had been in the center, the epicenter of that content that I was working from, I would not have had the mental capacity or the intellectual capacity to make the work. But it was so important that, it was like, admit it.
They wanted it to be, I guess, fact.
People wanted me to admit that I was working with autobiography.
It's like people need women to be in the work. They want to be able to see and be near you and feel you and like have this relationship with you, where men are allowed to have pure fantasy, Superman, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, why do you think people need that? Like, what is
I
that?
also don't want to speak defensively about why it sucks to be a woman, because I actually don't think it does. I think there's incredible opportunities, which is where we started.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't think like, well, men get to do this and women don't get to do that. I mean, the other thing I experienced was when I did do the porn paintings, I did get some, like, I thought rather idiotic, insipid feedback, especially from men.
Yes.
And it was like when the online thing just started, and there was blogs. I like how blog is an onomatopoeia for blog, and then there's Twitter, which is much more positive. It's like whatever, but it's like So I just remember there were all these little weird blogs where people were just very into like incognito trashing things, and I just remember at the time like reading something about how if a man were to do this, it would not be allowed. And I was like, what do you, like, hello, like, have you been looking at art history? Have you been looking at art? Have you been looking at anything?
Yeah.
And, I just thought it was funny because like, also, I've never asked for permission to do any of this. And part of the permission is, I mean, it's different for you to make a film because you need butts in seats. That's a word. That's terminology I've gotten from her. Yeah. Butts in seats. Because as a painter, I don't need butts in seats.
Yeah.
I get to make the damn thing and get to say fuck off.
Yeah.
And then put it in a painting rack and I have fully expressed myself. Maybe I have a couple of friends over and they all get to say, that's cool or that's weird or whatever. But I get to at least have my moment in, expressing something. And it was just, so I wasn't looking for.
But also, could we just be one viewer who loves it and buys the painting and keeps it for themselves?
But that was my experience as a younger artist, is like I had maybe one audience member and, half a collector.
Yeah.
And so, but I think that for a person who's trying to make something in a medium such as yours, I think that,
it's not only butts and seats, it's also financing so you can make the damn thing.
Well, and that's based on your butts and seats prior, right?
And you have to get, in a way, you have to get permission because you can't afford to make a movie yourself. I mean, unless you're making a tiny micro budget movie, you might be able to pull something off. But if you're making a kind of standard budget, whatever you want to call it, even a low budget movie, not a micro budget movie, but a low budget movie, you still have to, go to some corporate entity and say, this is valuable and will you make it?
And beg for money, yeah.
But I think, like, in terms of biography or autobiography, one thing, because I don't know if you've seen all of Tamara's films, but I feel like I now have, because you gave me links to them all. The early shorts, and they're really worth seeing.
I have not seen
And I always felt what was interesting about because they are somewhat of what I know about your life. The first film that I saw of yours was about this dead father which didn't happen to you. It didn't happen this way. You've made 2 films about dead fathers dying or being dead. So it's like that early film, which is called Family Remains. Mm-hmm. I'm an expert on Tamara.
Amazing.
So Family Remains, it's a really amazing film. And it's like, it's in black and white. And it's, the crazy mother and the daughter living in this house. And suddenly the father has been an absentee father. Mm-hmm. And that is kind of a theme until private life. But it's like, and so the father as a subject, I always thought that was an interesting take. It's not really, it's about the father, not about the mother. You have used when the father.
You mean in the short film?
So in the short film,
the grown-up
in the
long
short
film.
In the short film, the father's body gets delivered, and so he was never around, and then his body gets delivered to them,
and they have to
deal with the body.
But it's a much more heightened. It's not as realistic.
But I think what's interesting about that is that it's not
it's
a
gothic and.
I think it's very gothic, but and then you have the Slums of Beverly Hills, which is about the kind of foibles of the father.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, but I think that the interesting thing is, obviously, as females, we're made from a father and a mother, but it's like one doesn't really think about a woman's story really focusing on this male character, and you have focused many of your films on a male character,
except those first 2 shorts.
The first,
because the first 2 shorts are mother-daughter kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, even though there's a dead father in the house, it's sort of about this oppressive relationship with a mother and a daughter. But I've never done any feature stuff that deals with that.
But anyway, I don't know. Apropos of that, just the idea that, I think it's an interesting avenue, like where, sometimes one gets asked, like, why is the subject of your work female and versus male? And it's just like, but the question is, it's like.
Do you think people look into it more when you are the female maker? Do you think they question it and they want to know more about your weaknesses and your strengths and why you're doing this versus
maybe they want
the male maker?
Maybe they want you to answer more.
But I actually think that in a weird modern way, because there's so much kind of extra material that you get with an artist's presentation. Like David Lynch never does. There was that moment with DVDs where they would do the directors with the sound would be dropped out and the director would talk you through the entire movie, and I forget I don't even remember.
Like a director's cut.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a director's cut. It's like it's called a commentary or something. And now it's so antiquated because nobody has DVDs anymore. Yeah. But it was just such a weird thing to do. And David Lynch was like, I'm never going to do that. I don't want to do that because it took the magic away. I mean, it's sounding corny.
That's something I have a conversation with John about, the idea that you have to he's like, women give too much away.
Yeah,
I agree. And he says that about me, but maybe it's just not, maybe I'm saying it's projection of me being a woman, but that you have to be more secretive and hidden about your sources and your personal life, and that you use your art to display this thing to the world, but it's only for you to know what it really means.
But
That's
people
so
love that part
interesting.
of the book.
I know.
Love it.
And so that's the whole thing, is do you think that like somehow that's weak to show all those secrets, and so all the back, like the Wizard of Oz back of the curtain type of thing?
Right.
For me, I mean, when I went to see Picasso shows, it's always about like, let's see the different women in his life as a way to get to the man. You know, they want to understand what Fernand Oliver was like versus François Gillot and his different relationships with them. And I just wonder, like, people like to know these things. They like to know all these like little
I
background.
mean, I want to know when I fall in
details.
love
I
with
know.
something about
Yeah.
who
Everything.
the filmmaker,
And that's also
who the
culture
artist
now.
is, and
Yeah.
I know it, and also because there's internet and you can dig and look.
Or there's that
and,
Georgia O'Keeffe show at the Brooklyn Museum, which was her,
Yeah.
you know, her life
And
and
then
clothing.
Frida
and-
Kahlo
yeah,
with
and
the
that was
Frida
Kahlo.
Kahlo. Oh, they did
There's-
both?
They did it
two.
both. They
Oh, I
did
didn't know
both.
that.
So like in the
Yeah.
context of
It's her
women,
stuff. It's her makeup.
that
But do you
weakness
think
is a
that-
strength. That's like the
Do you
thing.
also, does it change your opinion on an artist when you learn something that they're a good person or a bad person or something? Does it affect it at all?
You mean like the
Like if
big,
they've done terrible things to people, if somehow they've been,
This is the big
they killed
question.
somebody
Only if
like
they've been terrible
Courbet.
to me.
Yeah, see, that's the other big question. That's a big question of our day and age.
Yeah, that's
is
a
that
now thing.
supposedly you can't be a bad person and get away with it. And you know,
Like, so we're
there were
not-
artists that killed people. You know, there were artists that
Allegedly.
that abused.
I actually
people.
have allegedly killed people. No, I mean, I actually think that you're, what we should talk about in a way is your show
Oh.
and not some abstract
But this is all about
male
this
artist.
idea.
I don't give a
of,
shit
like,
about
yeah.
male artists. Actually, I don't actually give a shit one way or the other.
Yeah.
It's just like I love great art.
Yeah.
And what's
Well, see-
interesting to me, and I take what I like and I spit out the rest.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't really think like I'm looking at a guy, I'm looking at a girl.
Yeah.
I just like, and I also think like in terms of the spectrum.
Yeah.
It's just like, you know, I think Picasso, you know, whatever. I don't really think of
Yeah.
him. I think of him as Picasso.
Well, I think it's the idea that something I've been just thinking about a lot. That was the reason why I think the idea of getting it to be about maiden mother crone, and we went to see Florence speak, which is also sad that she wasn't able to make it tonight. Is that she's brought up the subject of shame, and and there's this big thing that just came about for me doing this show, that for a very long time in my life I felt. Either I felt it completely on my own, or other people made me feel it. Is also an interesting subject of whether shame of whether I was made to feel ashamed or whether I just felt ashamed.
That's
is a
what
big
you
question.
said at
Yes,
the
Yeah.
benefit,
yes.
and I was like, oh my
and
god.
so the idea
That
like,
is something that happened
yes.
in interviews all of you
Yes.
gave. You all said it.
So this weird aspect of whether just being a young girl, at some point, someone made you feel ashamed, and whether we feel shame more than boys do, and whether I went into my whole life thinking this idea of being ashamed of being a girl, then a woman, being ashamed that I was a sculptor versus a painter, that I was ashamed of being Jewish, that I was ashamed of being loud, that I was from Miami. All these things rack themselves up, you know what I mean?
and all
so-
of those, and that shame had to do, if I'm asking,
Yeah.
like you weren't serious because you're a woman. You're not
Well,
serious
that's
because you're like a
that's the
Jewish
whole
artist from
thing.
Miami, and it's so bleh.
You're
Like,
showing
not-
you're showing too much. You're not being the quiet person in the corner.
Or the secretive
Or
person
secretive
that
person.
withholds
Yes.
instead of
The-
gives.
yes, the secretive person who doesn't tell all the secrets and of why they made the work. And all these different things. But whether that's also something that's intrinsic, which I found very interesting about watching Florence talk about it, is it just intrinsic to being woman, to being versus I know because I have 2 boys and a husband, they don't seem to have any of that, you know, and she writes about how she was a little girl and she felt ashamed about doing something and being caught. And I think children also in general are more ashamed than grown-up people, and they've done something and they think
Well, I think
they're-
people who don't feel shame are psychopaths, aren't they?
yeah. But
One
whether
of them can have like kill and one of them can't.
Can
think a
you make
psychopath
art
can
from
kill.
shame though, and it's a good thing? Or
I
is
actually
it-
my early work was 100%.
yeah.
So like I made these paintings and it was a show in 1990 and I walked in and it's sort of a story I've told a million times, but apparently nobody will ever remember it. So it's like I had this exhibition and they were paintings of backs and they were kind of surrealist and very highly crafted, and some people thought they were really good paintings, and then it was a weird build up because the gallery that I showed at, and I never thought it's because I'm a girl. See, this is a very different thing between you and I, is that I don't filter things. Well, like, that's because I'm a girl. I mean, you have to really fucking shove it in my face.
Well, you
for
and I
me
both
to
come from also no brothers, and I didn't feel that until kind of
but
recently.
I
about
just
the girl
don't.
thing.
I don't think through that lens. I just get like pissed off.
But is yours more, I mean, from especially that incredible essay that's in your catalog now,
The new one.
The Jared Ernest,
Ernest, he really kind of honed in on your experience at Yale during the time when you went, which was like all the guys doing this particular thing, but also people of a particular class in this kind of elitist environment.
Right, class
which sort
shame.
of shut you down.
That's a good point. That's
well,
a good
I mean,
point.
I
Yes.
actually had no class shame until somebody shamed me. And, you know, that there can be that where people will be like, you know, like say something to you and then all of a sudden you realize, wow, I'd never even realized that I was being judged this way. I mean, it's like, you listen, honestly, if you're not able to feel shame, there's something wrong with you. I think it's a really powerful emotion to draw from to make art. And so just to finish with this,
seems very generative.
just to finish with this particular anecdote. So I walked into that exhibition and I was completely mortified because I actually realized that I hated the work and I was like, how am I supposed to get through this?
I liked seeing that image though.
I was like, how am I supposed to get through this opening? How am I supposed to get through this evening? You know, like, and I just said I wanted to leave and I wanted to forget the show ever happened.
Wow.
But I saw those work and I spent a year unable to think about whether or not I would go on to make art again. And I felt like I had just gone off the rails. I wasn't 100% certain which direction to go. I was thinking that speaking of stories, that the I don't really think in terms of stories, but I was thinking that the content of the work I thought was correct. I thought that there was something about painting was like, you got to, you know, with the pinky up. And I thought, well, like, I don't have the pinky up. And when I do that, it's like charm school. You know, it's like I did, you know,
You were doing polite work.
I was doing like, it was something, I felt like there was a culture clash, like
technically proficient,
a Frisian,
quiet.
and I could never ascend to it. It would not have me. And I felt this incredible shame in that Frisian. And then as the story goes, we made use of something that happened in our lives. Matvey, my husband, we got old answering machines. We're heading back to that now. We're going to end up going back to the future. So it's like, there was an answering machine with a tape that was like, beep. Hey, Lisa, Matvey, we're having a party. So it was some friends from Yale. It was because it was a few years out of graduate school. And we'd love you guys to come, beep, hang up. And then we write it down in our little notebook. We're going to go to this party. And then like a day later, beep, oh, hey, it's me. Matvey, you can come, but Lisa can't come because we've all decided she's too much.
Wow.
So this describes what you're describing of yourself as the Jewess.
Yeah, loudmouth.
Loudmouth.
Yeah, Miami girl.
Whatever it is, whatever you are, it's a no.
Yes.
Whatever you are, it's a no.
Yeah.
It's a no go. You know, like you're too this, you're too that. I was just too. I was just too. Yeah. And Maffey and I were like looking at the answering machine going, what? You know, like that's crazy. So he said to me, because I was like, you know, moping around, not painting, thinking maybe I should go to NYU and study film. It was a moment, and then I thought, ooh, that would be a stupid thing to do because I still have to pay off student loans for painting. My failed painting career. So Matvey said, you know, we were talking every night, every day. I was like pulling my hair out, like, what's the problem here? I was trying to mince it, you know, chop it up and think about it. What was the problem? And Matvey said, you should switch places with your work because your work is too polite. And what you're describing, I was describing things to him that were troubling me about my work, and about, I probably wasn't talking about that party, but he went back and connected the two and said, you should make art more like yourself. They should get kicked out of the party.
Yeah. So this idea of like when you made this beautiful painting that then turned into this whole way of now finding yourself through that shame, did it continue and you felt the shame moving forward, or do you feel like you did it, you experienced it, and now you're done with it? So that's
No, I mean,
like
I think
owning it.
I think it informed work for a really long time. It probably informs work to some degree still. But I think that the important part of shame is it's one of many extremely universal and extremely powerful emotions.
very strong. Yes.
That everyone has. I mean, I think, I used pubescent girls.
Yes.
Which people didn't understand why I was doing that. They thought I was just being a pervert or whatever, or like playing out like something. But I did it because there's no greater shame that everyone understands than puberty.
Oh, yes.
Because as things are
Absolutely.
happening, and I thought of painting, I thought, what if a painting and the painter of the painting and the viewer were all engaged in this like dynamic of like mortification, But I mean, grief, which fortunately we don't, every single person alive has not been in the throes of grief, but we will be someday.
Yeah.
But fortunately, we are not 100% connected to that. But shame is something that we're 100% connected to. I think even men, certainly gay men, that's why Jarrett wrote about it, because he totally got that.
Yeah.
And I think that, we're fighting to, as artists, I think one thing is we're fighting to make something that is extremely vivid. Yeah. And I think that whatever is vivid is what really makes interesting art. And it's hard to get at something super vivid.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when you made Private Life, I mean, I think a lot of people were like completely, you were putting something out there that was a lot of people would have felt ashamed of, which is like a marriage that falls into asexuality because of this obsession with baby making. But I think that it becomes something that, you talked about in a way that no one else talked about.
That's also infertility is considered this thing. It's been
very
shameful.
I don't know if I realized.
I know.
I mean, I was just like, I only later did I realize like how taboo it was. Yeah. And I feel like, I mean, in this whole discussion of, women versus whatever, I actually felt that certain women really had a bad response to the film.
Wow.
Well, I don't. I mean, it's just a
I
couple
thought
things.
all
There was
the
like a film
relationships are
festival
so
woman
complex.
who ran a film festival, and I always was like, why didn't she accept the movie?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking like, oh, she's gonna love it. It's
Wow.
she's a woman. She's like my other movie, blah, blah, blah. And it just, she didn't dig it. I don't know exactly why, but it just, I knew that there were like a critic or whatever, a couple people that I was very surprised that they just had a bad response to it.
Well, that becomes part of the story, is whether or not people, whether they're other women.
But I remember feeling shame about that. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Well, the most vivid scene for me is the man who has to like jack off.
But that's so funny.
And then he finds out that he has to then have his balls. And I was just like, that to me, for some reason, really got me. Like in a way that I didn't expect, because it wasn't as sad as the woman. It was more sad with the man, that this idea of your testicles and your virility, and it's much more harsh with the guy.
I can see that.
And when he gets up and the thing's stuck in his butt, oh my gosh.
But I also felt for the young girl. Like I felt like I got cringy so much when she was just so eager to help, and they were like, okay, and then you're like, ooh, that's a creepy relationship.
And, the scene
and
where
then when the
looking
mom
at her
steps in, you get
body,
mad at the mom for but then you actually felt like the mom as the viewer for a minute, and then it gets all confused, and then she overdoses on the one thing. I mean, it's just.
It's really intense.
Very intense.
Okay. But I mean, I think that the notion of shame is very interesting, because I'm just asking you because I know that some of the questions have to do with process and beginnings and starting over and like
Yeah.
now what?
Yeah.
Like now what am I going to make?
But you know the funny thing
Like
is
that.
Well, it's also this identifiable aspect also that, for example, like one of the things that when I said, oh, I'm going to do this show at the Jewish Museum, the first question people ask me, are you Jewish? And I'm like, what does that mean? If I'm doing a show at the Whitney, are they going to ask me, are you Jewish? Are you Whitney? Are you
American?
Are you white? Are
Yeah,
you, I
yeah.
mean, and that's such a strange thing. And what does that mean?
actually I don't think that's so strange.
You
I mean,
don't really?
you can't have a show at the Jews Museum unless you're Jewish.
Not entirely
not
true.
true.
In fact, my next show is with a non-Jewish artist.
Yes.
I know, but
Yeah.
I was told
Yeah.
It's a part of what
you
we
have to be
do.
Jewish.
It's a mandate. I should
But
correct
it's also-
it,
but I
It's a
guess
mandate
maybe-
that it's Jewish artists?
it's a mandate that if you're not a Jewish artist, that some aspect of
Has
your
to
work
relate.
directly relates or expresses something about the Jewish experience. It does bring up this point about identity.
Yes.
And like,
yes, that's the whole point.
and-
is that
and it-
you
that's
don't
some-
have to have an identity to be at the Whitney. You don't have
Right.
to have an identity to be
Right.
Well, I
at
think
the
you
MoMA.
used to have to.
Really?
Yeah,
You used
Well,
to have to
now
make
that-
actual modernism to be at MoMA. You had
okay.
to actually be an American
born
to
in
be
the
at the
USA.
Whitney.
Now if
So
you can
it
live
actually,
here-
Okay,
but
you're right. Good
things
point.
have.
Okay, so Rachel,
Yes.
so that shame that you talk about and that it can either be inhibiting or then you push it away and you go, so how do you,
where does it end up?
I mean, that
is
for
it
me,
a push and pull all the time?
The truth is, it's like one of those things. You brought this up earlier. The idea that we're filtering things that maybe come much later on, and how when I did these Victoria's Secret sculptures, I started doing them in 2015 before any of I started doing the little maquettes, and it was like before any of this Me Too and this whole thing about
Right.
reclaiming, and it was just this weird idea of going back to the work that I did with Kiki Smith and Ursula von Riesensberg and Judy Pfaff, and trying to kind of make this aggressive female sculpture that came out of nowhere. But I realized we're all filtering whatever is happening, and we feel it in this kind of strange psychic, like little like feathers, you know, and we all are doing that all the time, and we're not aware of it ourselves, like almost like we're just this filter for something that's coming, and it's just going through us, and we're just kind of then putting it out there. And I know like Florence and Sophia do that too, and it's like I've talked to them about it, and you just kind of have this strange idea that what's coming is maybe 5 years down the road. Sometimes other people like El Greco sees it like hundreds of years down the road. Like there's this other artists that really get a feel for it. So I think for me that I've just come into understanding this about myself. I don't know what that means yet. It's all really new for me. Like it just came to me while I was putting the show together and thinking about how people have come at me with this idea of like, are you Jewish? And thinking also about my own identity and what does that mean and how it's confusing in my family, because my father was Jewish and my mother was Catholic. And then I was in all these different scenarios with Hebrew school, bat mitzvah, baptized, all this kind of stuff. So I think that if you kind of, at 50, I've noticed that a friend of mine, Jarvis Cocker, did a lecture that he just said, you just say, this is who I am at this point in your life, and you own it. And you just say, the good, the bad, it's all me. It makes me special. It makes me the artist I am, and take it or leave it.
One of the most instructive conversations we had leading up to your show was when we were in Maine, and you were having a conversation, let's just call it an argument, with John about the accessories.
For the wings and
For
all the
the
things I
Secrets
made
girls.
for my Secrets girls.
Yeah. And it was like, no, you can't have these extra objects. It's confusing the whole situation. And it was like, that was the first time where I was like, oh, this idea around excess and space and choice and complication and like, I don't know which way is up is actually a really particular strategy in your work. And that maybe that encompasses all of these ideas around shame and being like, well, this is just who I am. And then here we go. And then when I was researching a little bit about your work, and you mentioned somewhere about people telling you your movie was too long. And that if it were any other filmmaker, that if it weren't a woman filmmaker, it would never have been long enough. You know, that
it was about the bra scene.
That was
that
I mean,
like
it was a
about
conflation of things. You really spoke about time and that women taking up space or taking up time was something that really hit a nerve when people were talking to you about financing.
But
your
also,
film
but I mean, because the bra thing, it was like my first feature, and I was insecure and trying to do it, and also my first interaction with the world of commerce and like how do you get this made, and then the studio gives you notes, and then but anyway,
Yeah.
it wasn't. But it was a advisor at a film lab at Sundance filmmakers lab, which is a great honor and whatever. And he was an older filmmaker, but they're like established screenwriters, and so you would have established screenwriters, Hollywood screenwriters, read your stuff, and then you would have these one-on-one discussions with them about the work. And I just remember this guy who is like a giant commercial filmmaker person who said, you can't devote 5 pages to this girl getting a bra. And I just remember, like, there's part of me that's like, oh my God, you're right. That's so embarrassing. What was I doing? You know, the shame of like, oh my God, I'm insane. You know, and then that other part of me that was also like the second track running was like, screw you. Like, what do you mean? Like, but I didn't know. I was younger, and I still feel like I have those, even though that was a million years ago. I still feel like I'm always like, what do you mean?
But that's generally when you're making a brand new thing, you're introducing a brand new thing, formally, subject, and other ways into the world. It is going to be, problematic. And what I think you were talking a little bit about this, about what things being polite now.
Yeah.
The thing that has always shocked me is that I, as a kind of relatively, I think kind of good citizen, like was taught, you open the door for elderly people, you look after, just, pay your taxes, do this, do that. My mom used to say, all you have to do is die and pay your taxes. So it's just like, but in the reality of being an art maker, I took very seriously this idea of the avant-garde and about creating something new and about making something that hadn't been seen, and like, to not so much shock people because of like sex or anything, but shock them because they hadn't seen something. It's like, wait, no, you can't do that. But if you do it in a certain way and you make it convincing, I used to think of it as making something an inevitability. I used to love the word an inevitability. In other words, when I first started making my work, people said to me, even people who liked me, said, you can't make paintings of nude women, and then you can't make paintings of only women, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. And I actually said, and I don't know where I got the
balls.
Nerve. I was going to say nerve, but balls are good.
Context,
just or the chutzpah, or just the general, like, how did I get the, like from, some miracle to say, I'm going to make it so. I'm going to make this an inevitability that this will happen. I wasn't like, all women of all kinds can make paintings like this after me, which has kind of happened in some ways. Like, people make paintings now of nudes, or of a woman painting a painting of only women's stories is now like a thing.
Yeah, it's
and
true.
when I was doing it, it was like, you can't do that. And so, what you
I was
did,
young.
what you did.
I mean, I wasn't young.
No, but I think
the era, it was before anybody.
What is the difference between but
stuff like that?
But the thing is that the job of an artist is to push and wedge and to change opinions. And what's amazing to me is how much, nothing against your profession, but folks in your profession tend to, and I'm not saying you, I said folks in your profession, because clearly you are not that person because you're here. But it's like, do not want to be given the salve of what they already know.
Risk is a complicated word.
And but isn't it supposedly what you were taught that you wanted? Oh, well, let's have these artists that are risk takers. But in the end, what they want is just like the same shit over and over again served on a gourmet toast. And it's so disappointing because I'm like, I took you bitches seriously. I don't mean bitches. I mean just all, male and female.
Totally.
I took all you seriously.
Do you think based on what all you are saying and what that like women artists, film, whatever, actually take more risks?
I have no idea. I don't think so. I think
it
I
is
don't.
uncharted.
I don't think
this
you can
hasn't
break
been
this
done
down.
before.
No, you can't break this down.
I
You
think
can't break this down on
that,
gender lines.
But I do think
there
that
might be
the place
something to it.
being the Jewish Museum, they somehow have more freedom by being the Jewish Museum. I think there is something to say that if you are the person putting the wedge and being on the outside of society, as you said with the witches interview, that you do have more freedom than someone who's in an institution that's more accepted.
Well,
so
sadly,
maybe being a woman artist means that you're on the outside.
Here's the sad.
You know?
Here's
Yes.
the sad side of what you're saying
Yes.
is you have less to lose.
Yes.
Because when you're at the top.
Yes, you're right.
You know, it's like
Yes.
you know, like if you know.
But why is that a bad thing to have less to lose?
Yeah.
I
It's
guess?
not.
Yeah.
But
your
I say it's the
story
sad
about-
thing. It's the sad thing to other people. It actually ultimately is a gift.
But you're
Because if you take
because
it
the
as a
story
gift-
you tell
Yes.
of the paintings at the back, you were like at the lowest of lows.
Yeah.
You were depressed. You thought you weren't going to paint anymore.
Yeah.
You thought, and you said, "Screw it."
Yeah.
Hey,
Like
You were looking at film school. That's amazing, that story. You know,
And people,
yeah.
but people,
Yeah.
but the
I
funny
mean, that's
thing
like
is,
what people say about failures being good. I mean, even within a career,
It's how you bounce back.
Yeah, or
absolutely.
that you took the chance and you risked and then you failed and then what comes?
Yeah.
I
I just
don't
remember
know.
how
Careers
fascinated.
are long.
I just remember how fascinated a lot of people who were around me at that time were by the fact that I was so dismissive of a show that was hanging and so like clearly like my mom. I remember my mom trying to understand because she had been there at that opening and she had
was
gotten
proud.
a new mom outfit for the opening. My daughter's having a show in New York. You know, it's like overture, curtains, lights. And then I was like, shut it down. This is
Wow.
bad.
That's
But can I just
amazing.
ask you something? Because that's a very. I mean, I have self-loathing about almost everything that I make. I mean, I'm sort of repulsed. I mean, it's funny because I'm trying to write, and writing is very, and you like write, and then you're disgusted. I don't know how much disgust you have, either of you. I'm curious in the making of. Do you make? Ugh,
Well, wait a
do you-
minute. When you look back at your earlier work,
I'm not a big. I don't like to look, and I don't feel like.
Well, that was one of our questions. Do you?
but according to Rachel's friend who she was quoting about, there's nothing wrong with that. This is how you do what you do, and it's amazing. You know, it just more fairy
Jarvis,
dust on that freak.
Yeah.
Whatever freaky Tamara shit you're doing, where you're like, but
I
I'm
feel
disgusted with all my things.
it's like
It's so
starting, but I feel like the sense. I mean, maybe because I am starting over and I'm trying to figure out what I want to make, and I'm like sitting in my office and I'm like, it's like what it's writing. So the thing
Which
about
is the most painful thing.
well, it
actually.
is one of the weird things about being a writer and a director is that they're really different things.
Yeah.
So by the time you finish making a movie and promoting the movie, and you kind of forget how to write.
Wow.
And writing is such a like discipline, like a sport or something. Like you have to keep doing it to keep the muscle
Yeah, I
going.
could see
That to get it back, that kind of, at least for me,
It's true
it's
with painting.
really
But I think there's
hard.
artists
Do you guys
that
have that?
I think that there's artists that definitely just have a sense of themselves where the self-loathing is part of their arts. Like look at Seinfeld, for example. He's made a whole career on that aspect. And then you look at someone like Bruegel as a painter, where he's bringing the everyday peasants into his work, but then you see Velázquez, where it's all about this heraldry and this royalty. So I think it's how you see yourself becomes your art.
Maybe we can just wrap it up by talking about the exhibition title, which I think kind of prompted this. I mean, there's a lot about narrative and storytelling in Rachel's work. And so the title of the exhibition kind of was evocative of a fairy tale of some sort, Maiden, Mother, Crone. And I wondered what each of you thought about that, the title, if something was evocative for you.
Well, Rachel should go first since it's her title.
Well, I think, first of all, people are like, why crone? I just think because it's powerful. Crone is a powerful statement in itself, and it also comes from Game of Thrones, of course. And this idea, like, that instead of it being, was it Maid, Madonna, Witch,
well,
was the book?
The inspiration for the book came from this old book called
yeah.
Maids, Madonnas,
The Maids,
and
Madonnas,
Witches.
which I just like, wow.
Which was amazing.
I found that at the Strand. I was like, this is incredible.
And when I
that's-
went to her studio,
so-
it was the only book I took a photo of on your shelf.
So that's
Weird.
where the whole thing really started. But what do you guys think?
Well,
so?
I don't relate to it at all.
Yeah.
I was not a maiden. I skipped over that.
You did.
I
not.
didn't know. I was utterly not a maiden. Rachel, I think it's what you don't understand is how specific this stuff is to you.
Yeah.
I'm being honest with you and I'm being serious.
Yeah,
it's like
I know.
I know nothing of being a maiden. It's just it wasn't my experience. I think you really lived it. I mean, you were a young
Fashion
beauty
model.
and you were an object
Yeah.
in a way that I may have been seen as an object, especially by the psycho killer in the park or this person, that, but I didn't experience myself that way. I was
see.
really not, it was not, I mean, I regret it now. I mean, God, I was like, I should have like really enjoyed that, you know, experience, but I didn't. I was very cerebral.
Yeah.
And I didn't dress the part. I didn't play myself as a young girl at all, regrettably, because I would have actually enjoyed it. And that's a very strange thing about someone who paints some of the subjects I've painted, which why I say it was about otherness and in some ways about loss and regret. And then the mother thing, obviously, the only part about mothers that I know is that I had one, and I have friends who were mothers. But I, you know, chose not to be a mother. But I actually have made shows which were called The Brood and The Baby Brood, which are really about the generative quality of being an artist and making these little fuckers that I put out in the world to cause trouble on my behalf.
Yes.
And then the crone, I totally don't accept.
Yeah.
I am never going to be a crone.
Yes. Yes.
No, but I love the witch side of it, but it's not you know, not the kind of like, you know, I'm joking about that. I think of a crone as a wise woman, and I think that is something we can all, you know, let's toast to that.
I know.
Yes. Let's end on the wise woman note.
That is so good. I love the idea.
This is just water.
The next stage. The next stage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To the Carousel Progress.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Okay.